Hi folks, welcome to lesson 2 of Resources in the UK. Today we're going to focus on food and we're looking at the changing demand and provision of food in the UK and the fact that that will create some opportunities and some challenges to us and our farmers. So that's what we're looking at today. We've got 3 objectives. So this is what we're going to be learning about. Firstly, that there is a growing demand for food, but certain foods. So, for instance, high value food imports from low income countries. So, for instance, a pack of mange tout from Kenya would be a high value food coming from a low income country. Other examples, things like vanilla pods that you might put in some dishes, spices, foods that we can't easily get our hands on here in the UK. So we're prepared to pay for them, which is why they're classed as high value, and they're coming from low income countries, so they're coming from a long way, and there is a demand for that kind of food. Secondly, there's a demand for food all year round. So all year, demand for seasonable food. So for example, I like strawberries. Now in the UK, we can grow strawberries in the summer months, but we can't grow them in January in the middle of winter. However, our population wants them. We want to be able to eat foods like that all year round. So that's another demand. And thirdly, there's a more recent demand towards organic food. Organic food is food that's been grown without any kinds of chemicals on it, so no pesticides, no chemical fertilizers. So it's really healthy, it's really fresh, and often it's come from the local area. So it might have been grown on a local farm near to your house. And more recently, there's more demand for that kind of food because it's better for you, basically. So that's our first objective, looking at how our demand has changed. Secondly, we're going to be looking at the carbon footprint that is increasing because of food miles. That basically means if we are importing food from countries all around the world, that food has to get here by plane or by ship. And in doing so, it releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which, as you know, is a greenhouse gas and it's very bad for the planet. So we're going to be looking at that. And thirdly, some of the changes recently. There are trends in the UK towards 2 things. One is something called agribusiness, which we'll look at, and the other is organic farming. So those are our objectives. Okay, there will be key language used throughout today's lesson. If you know what these words in bold mean, then I suggest you move the slide on to the next slide and continue with the presentation. Otherwise, here we go. When we talk about food supply and provision, we talk about food, it means providing food to the people, basically. Food demand means how much and what types of food we want. Imports are foods that are flown into the country or shipped into the country, so we buy them from elsewhere. Exports are foods that we flow out of the country, so we're selling them to other countries. Self-sufficient. Being self-sufficient means that we are growing enough food within our own country to feed our population. So, in other words, we don't rely on other countries and we wouldn't need to rely on imports. Commercial cultivation. Commercial means business and cultivation means growing. So, in other words, commercial cultivation would be growing food on a massive scale, producing tons and tons and tons of it, in order to trade with other countries or to just provide our own people with food. Agribusiness is a farm that is operating on a commercial scale, like we've just said. So they're making huge quantities of food. Organic produce is food grown without the use of chemicals, which we mentioned earlier. Pesticides are chemicals which we put onto crops to kill the pests so that we get a better harvest. Fertilizers are chemicals or manure which is used to improve the soil so we get a better harvest. And food miles is the distance imported food travelled into the UK has come. Okay, how is demand for food changing? Here we have a graph, and obviously you know that we are in the year 2020. So if you look along the bottom there, we've got years from 1970 onwards. And we have got population growth. So this is nothing to do with food, this is just population growth. And you can see that in the year 2015, if we go up on the chart, we had roughly 65 million people living in this country. Now, what this graph is telling us is that we are predicting our population is going to grow. So by the year 2030, we're expecting it to be just short of 71 million. And I know from research that by the year 2035, they're expecting the population to be at about 73 million, so at the top of the graph. So what's this got to do with food? Well, if we've got more and more people coming into the UK or being born into the UK, we obviously need more food, so it increases the demand. Let's have a look at another chart. Where does our food come from? This graph is showing you two things. The dark blue is showing you exports. So that's us selling food to other countries. And it's also showing you the lighter blue, which is imports. That's food that we are buying into the country. And what's remarkable about this graph is for all of the foods that you can see there, so sugar, oils, animal feed, coffee, tea, cocoa, etc., all of these foods, we import way, way more than we export. In fact, for most of these, look at sugar, we import more sugar, twice the amount of sugar than we export. The same for oils, almost the same for animal feed. The only thing on this graph that we export more than we import is beverages, which is drinks. Aside from that, all the food, we are importing it. Look at fruit and veg. We export £1 billion worth of veg, but we import over £10 billion worth of veg into the country. So this graph is important because it's showing you that we are very reliant on other countries for our food. We're very reliant on imports. I mean, you could go, a nice thing to do now would be to pause this and go to the cupboards, your kitchen cupboards, and pull out a few tins and jars, etc., and look at the packaging and see where your food has come from, because I think you'll find it's flown a long way. This is an example of a typical turkey dinner at Christmas. Let's start with the wine. The wines come from Australia. That's over 10,500 miles away. It's come from Chile. They must have drunk 2 bottles. Chile, over 7,000 miles away. The runner beans came from Kenya, over 4,000 miles away. The crackers were made in China, probably with a little plastic toy in it as well, over 5,000 miles. The mange tout, over 6,000 miles from Peru in South America. The turkey itself travelled from Brazil, 5,500 miles away. That's what we mean by food miles. These food things, they've not come from our own country. They're not locally sourced. These have come from a long, long way away. We're importing these into the country. Veg was the one I picked up earlier, because veg, we only export £1 billion worth and we import £10 billion worth. This is where it's all coming from, look. So let's look at the pie chart and let's go anti-clockwise. So we've got Spain, 16% comes from Spain. That's close by. It's a European Union country. South Africa isn't, though. That's in Africa. Costa Rica, so we're looking between North and South America. That's coming a long way. Colombia, South America again. Netherlands, that's Europe. Dominican Republic, South America again. France, that's Europe. Ecuador, that's South America. Brazil, South America. Chile, South America. Turkey, Italy, Germany, they're the EU. So our veg is coming from European Union countries, but actually quite a lot of it's coming from much further than that, from around the world. Some products, like these, we get almost entirely from import. That means we're not even growing them ourselves at all. So if you're somebody that likes eating bananas or oranges or avocados, the chances are they definitely will not have been grown in the UK. They have been imported. So here we go. In terms of a number for you, this was in the Guardian not so long ago. The UK imports 40% of its food, and this percentage is growing and it's likely to continue growing. And hopefully that's what you've understood from these first few slides. Okay, so why does the UK import so much food? I'd like you to pause this, get your exercise book out and make this brainstorm with me as we go. You can have a think about why the UK imports so much of its food and why it doesn't grow itself. Maybe put some of your own ideas down on the sheet first, because that's what examiners love. They love students being able to think for themselves rather than waiting for answers. Okay, that done? Here we go. So why does the UK import so much food? Well, the fact is, it can be made cheaper abroad. You know, to give you an example, if we wanted to make strawberries, like I said earlier, in this country during winter time, we'd have to grow them in heated greenhouses. That would cost a lot in terms of energy. We've got to water them, we've got to give them the chemicals and the nutrients that they need in order for them to grow. That would cost a lot of money. Whereas in Spain, they can probably grow them in their winter time because it's still warm enough. So they've got the better climate for it. So we can actually get foods cheaper from abroad. That's one reason why we import. Secondly, I've just touched on it there, the UK climate is unsuitable to grow some foods such as cocoa, which is used in chocolate, tea that we drink, bananas. We cannot possibly grow those foods at all. It would be far too expensive for us to even try. So therefore we import them. Thirdly, we want stuff all year round, like I mentioned, strawberries. And if that's the case, then we have to get it from other places. Fourthly, we want more choice. You know, we don't just want to go to the supermarket and have a choice of apples or pears, because that's boring. People want to, have nectarines and peaches and passion fruits and things that are exotic. We want choice, and we have to get them from elsewhere. And finally, UK food can be expensive because sometimes we have a poor harvest. Our climate is good for growing, but it's not brilliant year round. So if we have a poor harvest, it means that the cost of food goes up. Things like meat, eating meat, that's expensive in the UK because we have to feed the animals, and to feed the animals is expensive, whereas it can be done a lot cheaper abroad. So those are our reasons for importing food. Does it matter? 40% is coming from elsewhere. Does it matter? Well, I'd like you to think about this farmer here. This is a UK farmer. Can you think about why it might matter to him? What would be the disadvantages to him? Try and think socially. That's to do with his health and well-being and livelihood. Environmentally, economically. You ever think about that now? Pause the slideshow and then come back. Okay, here are some of the things you might have come up with. Firstly, competition always drives down prices, which means farmers don't make as much money. If we're importing food from abroad because it can be made cheaper, then our farmer, if he wants to compete, he's got to lower his prices. He or she has got to lower their prices. And that means that they're not going to make as much money. So it's a disadvantage to them. And often we won't buy from our own farmers because they're too expensive. Also, if there's competition, because there's lots of other countries, again, providing these products, it will raise the standards. So things like potatoes, we might want them to be a certain size and a certain shape. We might want to look nice and big and round. Problem with high standards is it means there's a lot of wastage, because all those potatoes that our farmer grows that aren't quite the same size or they're a bit wonky in their shape, the supermarkets don't want them, they reject them. And the reason why, because you might think, well, that's really wasteful. It is really wasteful. But it's because of us, consumers. We like things to look nice. So it leads to a lot of wastage for our own farmers. Thirdly, the supermarkets want large amounts of stock. They just don't want to buy a few bags of potatoes from our farmer. They want to buy thousands of bags of potatoes. That means that our farmer has to give over all of his fields to grow one thing, and that reduces variety. That's not actually a great thing for us either as consumers. Okay, so that's our disadvantages to the farmer. What about the environment? So when we import food, this is how it arrives. It arrives on container ships. Well, some of it does. There's a container ship, that's coming from China. Each of those little boxes is a lorry load. The lorries that you see going up and down the motorway, that's how many can fit on one of those container ships. And these ships, they might take a number of weeks to cross the ocean to get to us. That might have taken a few weeks to come from China. So your tins and your jars in your kitchen cupboards, they might have arrived like that. Still not great for the environment, but that's how they will have probably arrived. They then get transported, as you can see on the lorries. The top left picture shows you the lorry without the actual container on the back, and the one on the right shows you it complete. But most of our food, or a lot of our fresh food, our perishable items, so our fruit and our veg, will arrive like this, because it can't travel for 2 or 3 weeks on a ship, because by the time it arrives, it'll be off, and nobody wants to eat it. So it arrives by plane instead, and it comes again on containers. That container that you can see will be refrigerated, which again uses loads of energy. And planes produce a hell of a lot of carbon dioxide. So we've got a huge amount of carbon dioxide being pumped into the atmosphere. So our big problem here, environmentally, is the food miles. It's the fact that it's come a long way and it's polluted the planet. There's a definition for food miles. It might be good to write that down in your notes. The average distance that food is travelling to get to your plate is 4,166 miles. That's the average. That just goes to show how bad it is for the planet. Okay, I said earlier in the objectives that we needed to look at the fact that there is a growing demand for high value imports from low income countries, and I mentioned mange tout, which you can see in the pack there. Also, you can see baby corn. They are also high value imports. High value because that pack of veg there probably costs £2 in the shop. And that's quite a lot of money for just a pack of a few vegetables. If we were to grow that in the UK, you could probably get the same pack of vegetables for about 50p. So therefore, we're importing them because we're probably eating these over the winter time when we can't grow them, and we're prepared to pay the high price. Let's have a look at the impact it has on the low-income country. So this has come from Kenya. The table there on the right-hand side shows what each player is getting. By player, I mean each person that's involved in the production of that pack of mange tout. The producer is the farmer. The farmer, let's look at the final column, the farmer is getting 12% of the final price. So if our product was worth £2, he's getting 12% of £2, which is about 24p. The exporter is getting 6%. The exporter is the person that exports the veg out of Kenya. The packaging, so the factory that's packaging it all up, they'll get 5%. The air company that's flying it into the UK gets 20%, so they're a bit better off. The importer, so that's the lorry taking it from the airport to our supermarkets, they get 12%. The supermarket gets the most, they get 45%. And if you add that all up, we get 100%. Now, just to make this make a little bit more sense to you in terms of real numbers, here we go. That's who's getting what. So there's our £2 pack of baby corn or mange tout. The farmer's getting 24p. The exporter 12p. The packaging 10p. The air freight though, 40p. Importer 24p. The supermarket 90p. It's a very unfair business, and that's my point. So we are demanding these foods, we're getting them from poor countries, and the poor farmer in Kenya is getting 24p out of £2. It's hardly anything, yet the farmer did most of the work. The farmer made the food. That's the product that you're eating. The supermarket does next to nothing. They just put it on the shelf. 90p. If you're wondering why it is that the producer gets so little money for the food, it's because our supermarket, Morrison's or Tesco, they want the cheapest price possible. So they will shop around and they will find a farmer that's willing to grow the crop for as little as possible. And that's the problem with competition. It brings prices down. The producer has to just accept it and get on with it. So the supermarket gets most. Air travel obviously gets a lot of money because it's an expensive business, flying food across the world because of the cost of oil. And the producer, as I've said to you before, primary products, raw materials, they don't bring in much money. But anybody involved in supermarkets, it's the tertiary sector, just to link back to previous work, they are putting the product together, they're manufacturing it and they're selling it, and that gets more money. Okay, so disadvantages and advantages as well to LICs. Pause the slideshow, make 2 columns, see if you can brainstorm as many disadvantages and advantages as you can to the low-income country of us buying their food. Okay, done. Here are some of the disadvantages. The farmers get paid very little, we've just said it. They have no job security or benefits. In other words, the supermarket could decide that they don't want to buy that farmer's produce anymore. They'll go elsewhere. Farmer gets no benefits if they're sick, or if they, if they're sick, they don't get sick pay. That's it, they lose the money. It also means that there's less land for the farmers to be able to grow food for their own people, for their local people, because they're giving over their farms to grow food for export instead. They're using a huge amount of water, and often it's in countries where water supply is very limited. So Kenya, for instance, that we mentioned last lesson, they have water scarcity because they have economic water scarcity. They don't have the money to be able to capture it. So we're using a lot of their water. The farmers will be using chemicals on the crops, and they won't be wearing any kind of protective clothing, so it'll be very bad for their health. Probably not good for us either. But there are some positives. So the advantages to low-income countries is that it provides jobs, and therefore it provides wages. So farming, packaging, transport, so it is providing jobs, and that in turn will always provide taxes for the government. So it leads to a bit of a multiplier effect, and the taxes for the government can be spent on development, so improving schools, hospitals, and other infrastructure. So there are some advantages too. Okay, here is a lovely clip. I suggest you pause the PowerPoint now and watch it. This is an advert for Iceland, which has actually been banned. I really like it because it shows you the environmental impact of food production in low-income countries. And this advert's all about palm oil, which you find in most products on the supermarket shelves. Here is a clip. I would like you to watch this. This is about agribusiness. Agribusiness basically is intensive farming aimed at maximising the amount of food produced. Farms are run as commercial businesses. They have high levels of investment, so a lot of money being spent on modern technology, like you can see in that image there with the combine harvester, and they spend a lot of money on chemicals. They are producing food on a massive scale for us in our own country. That's agribusiness. So it's all commercial. It's all for profit and for making money. Watch the clip, learn about agribusiness, because that we're moving towards. This here tells you a little bit about that farm in East Anglia. And some of what agribusiness is really about. So it's large. It says here, Linford House Farm in East Anglia is a large arable farm. That means growing crops, 570 hectares. I mean, that's an incredible size to get your head around. As an agribusiness, it has high inputs of chemicals, machinery, and other investments. The flat, fertile, and it's fertile because they put chemicals and fertilizers on it. It's flat, which is great for growing crops, and it's intensively farmed to maximize productivity and profitability. So that land will be being used all the time for growing crops and for making money. The main crop grown on this particular farm is wheat. That's what we make our bread from. Sugar beet and potatoes, which are well suited to the fertile soils and the warm, sunny climate which we have here in Britain. So we can grow those things quite well. Chemicals are used widely. So pesticides are put all over the crops to kill any kind of pests to maximise the food yield. And fertilisers are used to make the soil really good as well. The machinery costs are very high. But it does make the farm efficient. So on that farm with 570 hectares, there's probably only one or two farmers farming the land. Let's just say you're paying them £25,000 a year. That's £50,000 in terms of an output. So it's only employing a very small number of workers. So the combine harvesters that they bought, they might cost thousands to buy. But when you think about the cost of a worker, 25,000 a year, well, if you have, 10 workers, you think about how much money that would be in terms of an output. Whereas here, they're using machines which they can use year in and year out, and they're only employing one or two farmers. So it's a huge saving for them in the long run. The farm's invested in a 54 million litre reservoir, that's a lake, to tackle the water shortages so they can keep irrigating the land as much as they like to make as many crops as possible. So this agribusiness is a recent trend in the UK, and it's all about growing loads and loads and loads and loads of food and selling it to the supermarkets, and we're all doing it within the UK rather than importing it from elsewhere. There is a second trend. The second trend is towards organic food. But what is organic food? Organic food is food that's grown without those pesticides and fertilisers, or without chemical fertilisers anyway. Now, pests do become a problem. And so what the farmers do is they try and control them in a natural way. So, for instance, they might introduce ladybirds into the farms to eat away at the black flies. They will go and dig up weeds rather than spray them with a weed killer. And they'll use manure over the land instead of some sort of chemical fertiliser. They will not inject the animals with growth hormones to make them bigger and fatter and plumper. So it's all very natural. That's what organic food is. The advantages of organic food, why people like it, because it's natural. It's much better for the environment. It's much better for your health and my health because we're not eating chemicals. It tastes better. Disadvantages? There are only a couple. Food does go off quicker. And that is a disadvantage because people like things to last, don't they? But I can honestly tell you that the only reason some of your food lasts a long time in your fridge is because it's pumped full of chemicals. That's why. So if you're eating organic food, although it goes off quicker, it's so much better for you. Second disadvantage, it's more expensive. It has to be more expensive because the farmer will lose some of the yield to pests. They won't be able to grow as much because they're growing it naturally without these fertilisers and these chemicals. So they won't grow as much. And if they don't grow as much, they have to put the price up. So it will be more expensive to us. Most organic food is local food. And what's the benefit of buying food locally? Well, it supports local farmers. You know where the food's come from. It's fresher. So it's going to taste better. It's more likely to be organic. And there's less food miles. It's perhaps come from 10 miles round the corner rather than 5,000 miles across the globe. It's much better for the environment. What I'd like you to do now, please, is to complete these tasks in your book. I have attached to show my homework 2 pages out of the textbook, which you can use to help you. And obviously you can go back through this PowerPoint. All the answers to the questions here are in the PowerPoint. They're in my narration and they're in the 2 pages that I've attached on Show My Homework. Have a go at those questions. And finally, there is a bit of a challenge question there for people that are looking for higher levels, level 7 upwards. And that is, how might leaving the EU affect where our food comes from? Is that likely to be a good thing or a bad thing? Have a go explaining your answer. Cheerio!